On Neighborhood Network News, we get to meet hundreds of neighborhood activists, and when it comes to explaining and speaking up for the city, they're a treasure. But many of these activists turn their energy and knowledge into other missions. Our guest is one of them, who's come out with a series of publications on everything from overcoming rejection, pushing through shyness, or helping parents talk with their children about sex and relationships. We'd like to welcome Candelaria Silva. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, the other thing that the activists and the whole world has in common is that they experience problems in your life, and instead of just suffering the problems, you solve them and you write about them. Start with rejection.
I think that everybody feels rejection. That one happened, actually, my son graduated from Northeastern University, went to acting school in New York, and called me after a couple of years, was very despondent. He had gone on some auditions and he said, I'm just going to give up. And I didn't want him to give up his dream because he's very talented and I thought he should pursue it. So I wrote an essay and I put it on my blog, and it started getting a lot of hits. And then he shared it with a couple of friends. He says, Ma, you ought to print this up. So that's literally what got me started with doing it, that everybody faces rejection. And my thing is, when you go for an interview, when you go for a grant, in an interview, people they know what you tell them, they ask you questions, but they don't know the heart of you. So who you are is not rejectable. Your resume could be rejectable. He's very tall, and as an actor, it's very hard to be an actor to be that tall. He's 6'7". So he's actually pursued comedy and is doing quite well and doing voiceovers. So I wanted to do something that would inspire people, and so that got me started.
So what exactly did you tell him in that message?
Again, I told him that, you know, you can have a pity party, time it for a few minutes, and then pick yourself up and begin again. You don't stop. You know, that you can pursue your dream in many different ways, and that part of it is that it's like when Michael, I can't think of the basketball player, he made a lot of plays, but he also had a lot of times when the ball didn't hit the bat. Michael Jordan. No. So I think that when you're trying to do something, you don't know if you're going to get it the first time you apply for a job or you audition. You don't know if you're going to get the third grant you apply for. So you have to keep applying. If your goal is to get a job, if your goal is to be an actor, if your goal is to get a grant, until you reach your goal, you can't stop.
Well, another one of your publications here covers a situation I've experienced a few times with no pleasure whatsoever. Being in a crowded room where you're supposed to meet people and be nice to people and wholesale, and I would just freak out and just want to nibble on something and not deal with it. Yes. You found a more constructive way to deal with that.
Yeah, I found some ways. First of all, I'm very shy, and a lot of people don't believe that because they know me in my various roles where I've had to do public speaking and I do facilitation. It's very easy to do that in a role. It's very hard to do that as Candelaria Silva. So like you, I want to go to the food, but I'm missing an opportunity. I'm also slow to warm up, so when people charge at me, sometimes it's a little bit much for me. So I give myself an assignment, and that's one of the tips in the book. I'll decide I cannot go to the food table, or I cannot go sit by the window or stand somewhere until I've introduced myself to 3 people or 5 people, or until I've collected, 3 cards or passed out 3 cards or something. And that's one of the small tips that I do that has really, really helped me. And once I what usually happens is that in the process of doing my assignment, I connect with somebody, and we either find we have something in common, we talk about a book, we might talk about artwork on the wall, how do you know the people who are here or whatever, and that gets me started. And so very often I end up never really having to go off by myself, which is my natural inclination.
At events like this, everybody has the right to walk up to a total stranger and start talking. The hard part is figuring out, what do you say?
You can say, hi, have you ever been to an event like this before? Or isn't the view lovely? Look at artwork. A lot of times there's artwork at the event. I mean, you can talk about anything. You can fall back on the weather, whatever it is. But I find the hardest thing is when you know somebody vaguely and you don't remember their name. So now I've just gotten I have my line. I say to people, I'll say, I know that I've met you. It's not that you're forgettable, it's that I forget. I believe we met at this, but I just don't remember your name. My name is Candelaria. And that gets me, instead of sitting there struggling and sometimes not knowing what to say, I will often, talk about, I've noticed this here, there are a lot of people here, you know, this is your first time at an event, or this is my first time at an event. Sometimes I fall back on my role. I'll say, you know, one of the things I'm doing now is I'm a community membership coordinator at the Huntington Theater Company. Are you interested in the theater? I'll figure out some way of approaching the person.
Of course, the other thing you do is once you get into a conversation, sometimes you have to figure out how you're getting out of that. And I guess there are ways you can do it without being totally rude and inconsiderate.
Yes, yes, and that's also, I give several, there's about 19 different tips in the book, but one of the things I'll say, it's been very nice talking to you, but I really want to go around and meet some other people, thank you. It's okay to say, you know, I'm ending this.
Or can you introduce me to somebody I should
or
meet?
You could say, can you introduce me? I mean, there are all kinds of things like that. But it's just, for me, I still have to, for certain events, sort of go over my tips in my head, you know, read my own advice and think about, okay, what image, because of my size, sometimes people have said I've looked intimidating. I'm not a person who smiles a whole lot. And so I was sending out a message that I did not want to send out and missing opportunities.
It sounds like it's not necessarily all that easy to do to control how you're projecting to people. Any tips about how people can do that?
Yeah, I think one is to look at yourself honestly, to wear clothes that are comfortable for women. You know, sometimes we have shoes that are pinching our feet, and so we're actually in pain, and that might be why we are not networking. But I think of what impression do I want people when I'm being my best self, because sometimes I'm not my best self, I'll admit it, but when I'm being my best self, what impression do I want to leave with people? How can I best make that impression? And what I've realized is that most people are uncomfortable in crowds as well. So I'm not alone in this, and sometimes when you break the ice, people are very happy that you broke the ice.
You wrote a book about how to encourage parents to have conversations with their children, teenage children mostly, I imagine, about sex and relationships. And I think what got you started on this is that you were working at Suffolk County.
Yes.
Explain that.
Yes, I was working, I do freelance work for families first. I used to. I also worked on their staff for a while. And anyhow, as a freelance parenting education trainer, a contract came up to go to the Suffolk County House of Corrections, working for 3 weeks with a group of the women there. And one of the women asked me what makes a good relationship, because we were talking about, you know, having a relationship with a child's father, whether you were married or living together or had never been married. And that got me thinking, you know, what makes a good relationship? So I began to do some work to answer her question in the next session. And that started into just a series of questions about sex and relationships, many of which I had never really seen addressed in a lot of the books that I read. And so again, I used it as a blog post, and then I refined it and kept thinking about it. In fact, the second printing is going to be done, and I've actually the third printing, I thought of like 5 or 6 more questions the other night that I want to have in the next edition of it. So it's something, it's called Real Questions About Sex and Relationship for Teens, a discussion guide for parents. I don't give parents answers in the booklet about say this, don't say this, because I think each of us has our own values that we want to transmit, but I do suggest an approach in terms of honesty, in terms of how to begin to absolutely have regular discussions.
There are more answers and questions, so if people want to follow up on any of these paths to wisdom, is there a way they can do that?
Yes, you can go to my website, CandelariaSilva.com, and click the publications button. I also want to say I'm doing a workshop on Tuesday at the Martha Elliott Healthcare Center at 5:30, which is open to the public and free. And it's about dating violence and for teens, and parents can come as well as teens to participate in that workshop.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Candelaria Silva.